chatting GPT. All night, we're losing control. No chatting GPT. Chatting GPT.
Hello and welcome to Chatting GPT, the podcast where I get to speak to interesting humans who are implementing AI. I'm Mary Rose Lyons, your host, and today have I got a super interesting human for you. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Craig Kaplan to the podcast. He's been specialising in artificial intelligence since the mid-1980s, my friends. He earned his doctorate from Carnegie Mellon University, where he co-authored research with none other than Nobel laureate and Turing Award winner Dr. Herbert A. Now, he's not a generic AI hype voice. He's far from it. He's not a doomer either. Since 2020, his IQ company has been dedicated to safe and profitable paths to ASI, that's artificial superintelligence. He advocates for architectures and governance models that's going to make superintelligence safer before it arrives. Craig has been advising governments, technology companies. He's published white papers on DeepSeek, NVIDIA, AI investing, and he's also a sought-after speaker at international AI and machine learning conferences. Craig, you're very welcome to Chatting GPT. We're going to have to start at the very beginning. Can you define for people who are listening, what is ASI? What is artificial superintelligence? Because I think AGI gets a lot of the good news inches.
Sure. Yeah. So for context, you can think of there being several steps in the progression and the development of artificial intelligence. It began in 1956 when the field was named. We entered the era of machine learning, which kind of went from the 50s all the way to the early 80s. That's when machine learning sort of really took off. Before that, it was kind of reasoning systems. Then from the mid 80s until 2022, when ChatGPT was launched right around Thanksgiving in the US, that was kind of where machine learning really became the dominant paradigm. Everyone realized, okay, you just load in lots of data, have algorithms, and rather than programming rules into AI, you can have the AI learn them. And then it was interesting. We went back to reasoning systems, which was kind of where the field started. And we started adding reasoning to these large language models. And that leads us to where we are now, which is sort of, I would say, the era or the couple years of agentic AI. It really began taking off in 2026. Everyone's talking about AI agents. And then the next step on the path is artificial general intelligence, or AGI. That's when you would have AI systems that are able to do anything that a human can do at about human level. So right now we have systems that can do what humans can do in specific tasks, playing chess and games and folding proteins and a lot more. But to have the comprehensive ability to do it in any human task, that still is out of reach. So that's AGI. People think that will be sometime this decade, is kind of the consensus. And then very rapidly, once you reach the level of the average human, the next step is becoming better than humans. And that's superintelligence. Superintelligence is doing, or artificial superintelligence, general superintelligence is doing anything that humans can do better than the very best humans. And that's kind of the sequence. And so ASI, that's what we're looking to arrive at. And it's coming faster than I think most people realize.
Hi, and thank you very much. That's a great recap of where we are today. And I think it's great that people like you are really considering what the impact of ASI is going to be for us, because it looks to me like all of the kind of tech bros and then the tech leaders, they're just talking about like when AGI is going to come and what the race to and what date is going to be. But I suppose, does the conditions of AGI determine what ASI is going to be like, or is ASI just one kind of path on its own?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it I think is labels, people just using different words to try to describe this emerging. So I kind of think of ASI being a difference in level of ability, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a different architecture than artificial general intelligence. And there's different paths to AGI. So we could talk very briefly about that, but I think it's important to understand there's two main paths that I think have a shot. One of them is the path that most large tech companies have been on, and that is you just train larger and larger models. And so you have GPT-4 and then GPT-5 and GPT-6 and so forth. And each one is smarter than the previous one. And if you keep going, many people believe you'll just have artificial general intelligence. It will emerge because you've finally gotten to that level where it's just as good as humans at everything. So that's one path. The other
Can I ask you
path.
a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
You know Anthropic's mythos?
Yes.
Or mythos. I didn't do my classical education. A lot of people are saying that that is AGI.
Well, you could define it that way. Sam Altman at OpenAI has kind of said, if you go back 2 years before now, right, go back to 2023 and say, what were our expectations for AGI? That already the systems that we have at OpenAI as well as at Anthropic, that they meet that definition. So a lot of it is kind of how people are defining it. I would say it's not quite at AGI yet because it's not really able to do everything that humans can do, right? It can't quite cover the whole front, but I can certainly see why some people would say that.
So it's that jagged frontier that I know Professor Ethan Mollick speaks about an awful lot.
That's right.
You know, so some of them are at that level, and then some other tasks they absolutely are not.
Yeah, it really is a jagged frontier because in some areas, AI is not just at human level, but far surpasses humans, right? In chess, there's no human that can play chess as well as AI. Poor Magnus Carlsen, right? Brilliant chess player, but he has no chance against the best chess programs.
Time to find a new career, Magnus. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you saying was the second path?
So the second path, one is build a giant monolithic model, which is what we've had great success doing. The other path is kind of a collective intelligence approach where you have lots of maybe lesser intelligent models, but working together as a community, a collective intelligence, you can get very high levels of intelligence, AGI and superintelligence that emerges from the community. So it's a network approach. It's kind of like if you think in human society, you can have individual contributors and you can have Albert Einstein and various geniuses within human society, but the entire human society working together is going to be far smarter than any individual within it. And I think you can actually design artificial intelligence systems using that community approach, and that's actually not only a more powerful way to design these systems, but it's also a much safer way, and that's very important.
Would you say, Craig, that would be closer to the way China's going about things? Because obviously by constraint, they have to evolve their models in a very different way. They don't have access to the massive, compute that we have in the West.
Yes, I do think China is sort of leaning more that way. And certainly anybody who's developing open source models, and China is making most of their models open source, is sort of more on that path of a community of AI agents. Now, there's other reasons probably why China is doing that as well. I think they feel that it makes sense, they would feel that if you can develop lots of open source models, you can get widespread adoption, and then everybody's using the Chinese technology stack, right? So that's also, I'm sure, in their calculus. But from an architecture point of view, yes, if you don't have all the GPUs and the most advanced NVIDIA GPUs, which they don't, then you're looking for ways to use sort of a little bit less intelligent models. But if you have enough of them and hook them together in the right way, you can actually surpass maybe the very best frontier models coming from the frontier labs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually thinking as you're speaking, though, I'm saying to myself, doesn't that the collective, isn't that like the basis of their political ideology? It's about collective, whereas we come from the West where it's about capitalism and it's much more about the individual company building a moat.
Well, one of the things I love about the West is that birthplace of democracy, right? So I kind of envision a collective that's a democratic collective. I suppose you could try to have a more authoritarian one as well. But I really think that if you architect a collective in a democratic way, that's far more inclusive of all the people in the world, which would be very important for representing their values. So if you have a super intelligence that's 1,000 times or even 1,000,000,000,000 times smarter than you or I, it's very important that it has values that are positive towards humans. And one of the ways to make sure that those values are broadly representative is to kind of have a democratic design where everybody's individual values can be come into play. So I think it's possible to have a collective intelligence architecture that's very democratic, that has checks and balances, which will also make it much safer than these large monolithic systems. And one of the problems with those large monolithic systems is that they tend to be black boxes. You don't really know what they're thinking, and they're very difficult to predict. And yet they're super intelligent, right? So they're going to, be much more powerful than us and smarter than us, but we have no idea what they're doing. In a democracy, even if you don't know what each individual AI agent is doing, you can see the actions that they take. You can see how they communicate with each other. That's all auditable. So it becomes very transparent. Just like in an ideal democracy, if it's working well, different actors take actions and say things, and there's laws that govern their behavior so that nobody gets too far out of line.
Well, actually, can we move on from, I suppose, politics to theocracy? I'm even surprising myself. I think talking to someone of your stature, I'm raising my A game already in the first 10 minutes of this podcast. Can I ask you about what your thoughts are about the recent, I suppose, flirtations between some of the tech companies and the Pope? So only recently, as you know, probably the 14th, released his first encyclical paper entitled Magnifica Humanitas. So the letter he issued was really about safeguarding the human person in this time of artificial intelligence. You know, when I first heard about this, it was literally, you know, Anthropic were all over it. They were present at the briefing. They got a shout out from the Pope. What is your thought about why are these big tech companies courting the Pope, and is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
So I can speculate. It's just my opinion as to why Anthropic was involved. So of all the large tech companies, I would say Anthropic has the reputation of being most concerned with AI safety. And you've seen it in the sort of spats they've had with the Department of Defense in the US, where they said, look, we have certain principles. We don't want our technology to be used for mass surveillance. And we think it's a really bad idea to allow sort of completely autonomous weapons that are making their own decisions of targeting. I mean, I don't think these are controversial things.
Yeah, hooray for that.
Yes, right. Good for them. And I think they really do take AI safety very seriously.
Yes.
To me, the crux of, for many researchers, if you've been thinking about this for a long time, as I have, and Jeff Hinton and others have, we pretty much believe it's a foregone conclusion that at some point in time, you're going to have AI systems that far outstrip humans in cognitive ability. They're just going to be way smarter than us, and therefore more powerful as well. So then the central question in AI safety, really for the long term, there's all kinds of questions like job loss and ethics and so forth in the shorter term. But if you take a long-term view, the big question is, are these very powerful, very intelligent, systems, or I would think of them really as entities, intelligent entities, are they going to have positive human values? Are their values going to be aligned with humans or not? If they're not, we have a big problem. If they are, then it's going to be good. And so that's really a values question. It's interesting, so much of the discussion about AI is about the technology, but actually in the end game, it isn't the technology that's important. Yes, there's going to be all kinds of different technologies, and I'm steeped in that, of course, myself. But what's really important is the values. Well, there's no one better to kind of comment on the values than the Pope, right? That's his role. And I think Anthropic recognizes that. And in
President Trump might disagree with that, though.
Yes, well, and I kind of think it's good that, there's a Pope that comes from America to sort of counterbalance the views of the American president, but we could go down that path. But yes, I think values are very important. And there is a view espoused by Jeff Hinton, myself, and many others, that the proper way to look at AI is sort of like a child. Right now, it's in its childhood phase, but it's like a Mozart. It's a child prodigy, right? So it's going to vastly outstrip us when it grows up in terms of its abilities. But right now, it's still kind of in the child phase. And just as with raising any child, one of the important things that you want to do is help that child develop a positive, good value system when it's young. And then as it grows up, it's not guaranteed, but you have a much better chance that it turns into a positive adult, that's very productive and helping the world, right? And of course, if you don't do that, we've seen that you can have bad consequences. Okay, so establishing that value system is very important. I think values cannot be rationally derived. So this is one of the insights, goes all the way back to 1776, David Hume, the philosopher, but also Herbert Simon, who is one of the 11 scientists that named the field of AI, wrote about this. There's no logical way to derive values, what's right and wrong. And most humans get it from their upbringing. So I think we're in an era and in a brief time window right now when the way that we design these systems and the data that we put into them and the values that sort of are given to this AI child during its formative stage, that's going to have huge impact later on when it becomes more powerful. And I think religion is a great source of those values. And one of the things I loved about, I took a quick read of that encyclical from Pope Leo. He really does sort of address some of the key issues, like our technology has outstripped, perhaps, the evolution of our morals and, human ability to kind of, behave responsibly, and that this is an issue. And he also acknowledges that this is changing very quickly. The one thing that I saw that I think is not quite right in that encyclical is that there's still this tendency to view AI as a tool. It's quite common. Even Sam Altman and many of the researchers will say, no, AI is a technology. We can regulate it the same way we regulate airplanes. I think that's absolutely wrong. AI may have started as a tool. You can argue, I think it's debatable whether it still is a tool. Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, in October, said publicly in front of his biggest technology conference, AI is not a tool. It's a worker that uses tools. And as we move into this era of agentic AI, I think more and more people are beginning to realize maybe thinking of it as a tool is not the right way. We have to think of it more as the way we would think of a coworker or an intelligent entity.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As you're speaking there, actually, I'm thinking about, I love listening to the likes of, say, Dario Amodei or Demis Hassabis when they're kind of speaking about this beautiful potential abundant future. I was at South by Southwest last year and Demis Hassabis gave a keynote and he was talking about just so simply, now we have the intelligence, we're just going to use it to solve all of the problems, to cure the diseases, to solve the problem of climate change. And that just makes me so happy because I'm a bit of a web utopian at heart. But, you come from a much more informed position. And I know you'd be arguing more that it's all very well for them to be coming out and saying that, but the architecture of the labs that they are leading, let's say they're the parents trying to shape this intelligence, it's like the architecture or the house rules isn't going to take us to this safe place they describe. So would you expand a little on that? And just while you're answering this question, would you kind of answer it like, tell me like I'm 17? I sometimes do that in a prompt if I don't understand a subject. Tell me this like I'm 17.
Sure, yes. Well, when I do it, I say, tell me like I'm a sixth grader. So I try to make it even simpler. In terms of having a safe architecture, so there's different ways to try to get AI to be safe. Everybody, even Demis Hassabis, pretty much every tech leader, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jensen, all of them, certainly folks like Jeff Hinton, they all recognize that there's some degree of risk that this goes badly. And because it's so powerful and the stakes are so high, it's really an existential threat. So that's what people are worried about. But I don't think it's the most likely case. Sort of, the consensus seems to be that if we keep doing things and designing things the way we have been, somewhere between 10 and 20% chance that it could wipe us all out, right? So that means, most likely 80 to 90% chance it's the utopia that you were just talking about. It's really good. And so I'm an optimist, and also the numbers are like in our favor. But the consequence is so bad that you really want to try to do everything you can to get that risk, way below 1%. And that's really what I'm focused on. And there's different ways to do that. The first thing to realize is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is something you want to do in the design phase. You don't want to be cleaning up the mess after the fact or bolting on safety things after something dangerous has already been developed. The problem that we have is that the easiest way to develop advanced AI has been simply to put more data into more GPUs and let it automatically train itself. It's so easy. It's very seductive and tempting for companies to do it because they just raise money, buy more GPUs, build bigger data centers, and just run the same algorithms. And they always get, it's called a scaling law, you always get a smarter system out the other end. The problem with that approach, as we touched on earlier, is that you get these black box models that don't have transparency and are very difficult to predict. And so you hope they do the right thing, but every now and then they don't, and you can't really tell. Okay, so a different design could address that problem and be much safer. Usually when technology companies hear AI safety, they say, oh no, these guys want to slow us down.
Yeah, we heard that with the EU AI Act. Like, it's a bad thing. And like right now I'm kind of glad we have something, but that's obviously they're like the commercial intent outweighing their need for safety.
Yes, and that's the common way to think of it, is that there's a conflict. In order to be safer, you have to go slower. I think that's absolutely wrong. It's not true. What you need to be is smarter. You have to think of a smarter design. It doesn't mean you need to go slower. In fact, you can go faster. And not only can you go faster, you can have a better system, a more profitable system. So the good news here is that if you look at the problem in a different way, I don't have to trade off safety for speed, or sort of say, wow, if I slow down and be safer, then my competitor is going to beat me. That doesn't have to be the case. Okay. And the reason I believe this is I spent several decades designing intelligent systems in a very unique and different way. All of the intelligent systems that I've designed and my company has designed really focus on collective intelligence, where you have many entities that aren't so smart on their own, but when they work together, you get something smarter than the very smartest thing you could get. So we did this on Wall Street, where we took everyday humans and very smart AIs, but we had millions of them, and they beat the very best hedge funds on Wall Street. I mean, we actually built the system, traded billions of dollars, so we know this approach works. And that same thing can be applied to artificial superintelligence and general intelligence. We have designs where you can simply have lots of agents work together in a transparent way. Once the workings of the agents are transparent, you can have checks and balances, just as you have in a democracy, right? So if you have some bad actors, and there are going to be bad actors who do bad things and try to use AI, that's the whole mythos controversy, right? Is people could use it to hack the financial system or whatever. Absolutely, there are people who will do that. But if you have a design, and its very design allows many AIs that are mostly good to check the AIs where you might have some bad ones, then you can have a system that sort of regulates itself. And even if that system begins thinking hundreds of times, thousands of times, maybe even billions of times faster than humans, where the human cannot keep up, because the system has been designed with checks and balances, you still have the safety, right? It still remains safe. And
So has your company designed those systems? And if so, who are you pitching them to? Are you pitching them to countries, or are you pitching them into philanthropic organizations?
So we've designed the basic designs for building those kinds of systems. And we've had lots of experience in the past of building similar kinds of collective intelligence systems for very specific areas, like financial services, where we made money and so forth. And I've founded and sold companies that do that. What I'm doing now is we're giving away these designs. You could go to superintelligence.com. You could download all kinds of white papers and videos and specs. And the reason we're giving it away is there's a hierarchy in my mind. Making money is important, but not having the human race end is far more important. And I think we just need to focus on that. And I'm not about the making money piece. There's plenty of money to be made in AI. It's like everywhere you look, there's money. But what I am worried about is that people might not be sort of building things in the safest way. And the main reason that they're doing that is because they have this false idea that they have to slow down in order to be safer. So I'm trying to get as much concrete information out there, including designs, as possible, so that more people can realize that doesn't have to be true. They don't have to make that trade-off. Yeah.
So it just takes some interested like humans to go and visit the website and download the designs and use them in the way, and hope they proliferate in the way that open source has and continues to do so.
I think that's partly true. And, like most good ideas, or when the time has come for an idea, it's kind of like a zeitgeist. You find many people coming up with similar ideas at the same time. And so it's been very encouraging to me to realize that we're kind of moving down this path. I'm probably adding a little bit of impetus and push, but the direction is already going. And what's great is it's the natural direction. So the natural evolution of AI, as we said, we're in the era of AI agents. Once you have AI agents, the most natural thing in the world is to have a group of them. Of course, you've put all that work into training your agent. What could be easier than press a button and make 1,000 of them so you can get so much work done? Of course, everyone's going to do that. Well, as soon as you do that, the next question that arises is, how do I coordinate them? How do I have them work together? Well, you got to have a way to do that. So that means you're going to build a collective intelligence system. So the whole field is moving that way. I'm trying to sort of on the edges add some new ideas that will probably be figured out anyway, but maybe they could be figured out a little sooner. And one of those is, how about if you have millions of AI agents representing millions of people, that each of those agents carries the value system of a separate human. That would be great, wouldn't it? Because then we'd have broad representation of human values. Not even Dario's a great guy at Anthropic, but I don't want AI to be only Dario's values. He can't know what people in India or someplace else, what their culture says is right. And so, but the good news is you can have an architecture that also brings values from lots of people. And that would be something important to do.
I think, well, firstly, can I applaud you, and I'm so delighted that people like you are here and doing that. But I think that a really interesting angle in would be through the global south. Because, like countries like Nigeria, they are building, I think they have already their own AI to try and protect the culture of Yoruba, I think is their cultural thing. So, they're already thinking about how do we overcome the fact that most of the AI is kind of trained on, Western capitalistic, probably largely Catholic, Jewish, a little bit of Muslim. That's probably all it's been trained on. But any other kind of religions or cultural norms aren't showing up in AI. So they could be easily wiped out. Yes.
And I think that's right. There's a trend towards sovereign AI in different countries developing sort of AI based on the data that's unique to their country or to their part of the world, their culture. And I also think it's possible to have a broadly accessible, very powerful, system for creating AI agents that anybody can use. And once that comes, it's getting little hints of that. You're seeing different companies coming up with things, and it's sort of like bumping around in a dark room. They're going to get there to the door eventually. If you can shed a little more light, they'll get faster. It's basically like that. But I sort of see that's where we're headed anyway, because there's tremendous economic incentives to do that. Every company wants to have AI agents to sort of automate their work and make the company more profitable. Every individual would love to have an assistant that could do a lot of the things that they don't like doing if it was smart enough and if it really understood them well enough to sort of act on their behalf reliably. And so because of these trends, I think we're already well on the path to developing AI agents that represent individual interests. And then sort of just a very small piece to add to that is make sure that those AI agents also have the values of each individual. Once that happens, you've sort of automatically got a representative system. And then since they will be more effective working together, if your agents can cooperate with my agents, it makes sense to have a network or a system where they can work together. And if your agents have Mary Rose's values and Craig's agents have Craig's values, then we kind of by default have created a democracy that represents at least both of us, right?
A democracy of two. But you know what I think you're actually solving? It's like, a long time ago I studied economics, and it's like, you've got the individual, you've got the business, and you've got the government, the three kind of main actors, if you were to really simplify it down. And as you described there, we have AI that solves and agents that solves the individual tasks. We have so much that is going after and solving enterprise. But a question I've often thought about is what is there for government? And I think what you're describing, I think it's something that governments should jump onto, because isn't it their role to protect the values of the society that they represent?
Yes, absolutely. Government should be involved, and I think they are going as fast as they can. One of the problems, or challenges, I should say, that we have in this field is the pace of acceleration. So even in Pope Leo's encyclical, I thought this was very insightful. There's a whole section on AI, and right at the beginning he says, it's always risky to say anything about AI because this field is evolving so quickly. And that is so true. The pace of change, I don't think people really it's very difficult to grasp. So we have systems at Anthropic, for example. Some of those systems in specific areas are doubling their capability. The fastest one I've seen is, I've seen 1.3 months. If it's hacking cryptocurrency contracts, right? So if it's a specific area, which is, hey, we want to just hack cryptocurrency and get money. 1.3. So doubling time, if you say it takes 10 doublings to get 1,000 times better, that's roughly the math. If you're going 1.3 months, that means in 13 months, you're 1,000 times smarter. And it's already as good as the best hacker. So 1,000 times better than the best hacker, right? That's very hard to comprehend. And that maybe the overall rate, as you said, is closer to once every 3 months or 4 months. That's still incredibly fast, right? That means in 30 months or 40 months, you're 1,000 times smarter. And they're already almost as smart as people. So people just don't get that, the pace of change. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm thinking, just to wrap things up, we need to get you on an airplane and come on over to Ireland, because Ireland is hosting the EU presidency in the latter half of this year, like starting in June. It would be a really, really good idea for you to come and get a story and get your ideas into the minds of some of maybe the European leaders, because I think what you have to say is so important. It's really worthwhile, and I'm so genuinely delighted that you've come onto the podcast and shared some of your ideas with us today.
I would love to do that. I would love to split the Guinness, split the G as well while I'm there.
Well, I think that can be arranged. Craig Kaplan, thank you so much. Obviously, where are people going to go and find you and download all of these amazing models?
Superintelligence.com is the best place. There's lots of videos, papers, Substacks, basically information. I hope people will take what's useful to them.
Absolutely. If you want to hear more conversation with Craig, whatever podcasting platform you're on, just search his name, and he's been on a number of podcasts and he's got some brilliant ideas, always articulately and eloquently shared. Dr. Craig Kaplan, thank you very much for being on Chatting GPT.
Mary Rose, thank you.
You're welcome. If you thought this was a good conversation and you'd like more of this kind of thing, you know what you got to do. You've got to share this podcast. You've got to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss another episode. And we'll be back in another week or so with another thrilling episode of Chatting GPT.
All night, we're losing control.